Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. On today's show, I spoke with Stéphane Bousquet, Senior Manager of Digital Channels at National Bank. As followers of the podcast know, I like having a lot of people from the tech space, be it investors or entrepreneurs. But from time to time, I also like to talk to people that are in the trenches working in large, quote-unquote, traditional companies. And Stéphane has been doing this for quite a while and has been a leader in the space. So it was a pretty insightful conversation. A little bit on Stéphane. He has had the privilege of actively contributing to the development, marketing, and outreach of many digital products that have become part of the daily lives of millions of people by virtue of working in these large corporations. These experiences that he's worked on are in the traditional and digital media markets that have allowed him to acquire quite a bit of experience and strategic expertise in a lot of different environments. On the show, we spoke about how he got started in the tech sector really early in the late 90s, what he thinks about digital transformation within a large company, getting out of your comfort zone and its importance in your career, and also about hearing the voice of the customer and how he uses that in his day-to-day work. And then finally, one of the trends of interoperability that he thinks is extremely important. Stéphane has a very varied background, having worked in media, now in finance, and is a classic entrepreneur, helping to enable strategic change in a corporate environment. I think that you'll enjoy the show. Thanks. Stéphane, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
I appreciate you accepting my cold reach out on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I found on the show wrote in and said you have to have Stéphane on, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Wow, thank you.
I guess my first question, having gone through your bio, Stéphane, is you were, I guess, an early guy in the web days in the late 90s. So I'm curious, how'd you get your start in the late 90s in the web, in that space?
So actually that was a very, very interesting time to graduate from university. So before starting my career in the field of digital and as we called it way back then, interactive multimedia, I had previously studied in computer science and actually dropped out of computer science, being a bit turned off by the the fine-grained details, and it wasn't for me. I had a deep-rooted interest in technology, but not to the extent where one day I did decide to sort of build from scratch an operating system in assembly language. So I dropped out of that, did a complete 180, and studied in communications at UQAM, specializing in radio. And following my graduation, that was in 95, sorry. There was this new program that had just been kicked off at UQAM at the master's degree level, which was master's in communications, but in interactive multimedia. So I saw there an interesting blend between my two interests, being media and technology. So signed up. Thankfully, I was part of the very first group in this new program, and so spent 2 years within that program and got my master's degree. And at that time, when I graduated in '97, so that period 95, '97, that's where Montreal, the whole digital industry was really was picking up speed. So there was a tremendous momentum, a lot of creativity, a lot of businesses that were starting up at that time. And so after hooking up with a various number of startups, Bell Canada were on their side building a department with a very broad / experimental type mandate to deliver innovative communication solutions internally, and whatever would sort of germinate into something more sustainable could possibly see the light of day in from a product standpoint. So spent a couple of years there. They were very, very interesting, informative years where we basically witnessed the birth of the general public internet, moving from developing for CD-ROMs to developing intranet sites and the very first websites. So those were really, really fun times.
Yeah.
So that was the genesis of it all.
What did you enjoy the most from those early days? Right, obviously, seeing the field grow, but what was it? What aspect of the work you found was the most interesting for you?
So two things. So the first one was obviously, being part of the birth of something important, something that was changing the world. So being part of that movement in the very, very early days was an insane thrill. Just that alone was, got me up every morning and had me working, like 7 days a week and crazy hours and everything else. But the other thing that really struck a nerve was the notion of transformation. So working in an enterprise, working in an industry that had been going about its business pretty much the same way for, decades. And all of a sudden, a shift comes along so fundamental, so important, that, all the rules change almost overnight. And, in the wake of this transformation, you find an organization where, there's huge resistance, confusion, I wouldn't say a lack of vision, but just an overall sense of, what do we do with this? Where do we go from here? And so being confronted with that's what I found was the biggest motivator for me. And even today, like, more than, 20 years later, that is still the key aspect of my work that, gets me excited every day. Yeah. The notion of transformation.
Yeah, and it seems like you also picked the industries that are definitely going through transformations as well.
Yeah. Well, there was so the first, going from 1999 to 2009, that 10-year period. I spent my career in media, and going from spent most of my career at CBC Radio-Canada. Working on transformation projects for radio, television. And from there on, there was a stint at the National Film Board, so working in the field of cinema. And there was also a 2-year period at Québécois, at Sun Media, le Journal de Montréal. And once again, the common thread with all those various mandates I had with those 3 employers in the media sector was always digital transformation. Always.
Mm-hmm. What did that mean for those organizations back then?
Oh my goodness. There were so many challenges, and some of them that are still very valid today. So, digital transformation in the context of radio and television. First of all, there was the notion of the obvious one, distribution. So the whole notion of distribution, which was being completely rewritten, reinvented. Cable, satellite, airwaves could no longer cut it. The notion, even back then, when bandwidth was, people were accessing the internet through modems, and bandwidth was, a fraction of what it is today in terms of speed and performance. We were still already at that time envisioning a future where radio and television would be consumed via the internet, via networks, and the whole notion of programming schedules and programming grids would be obsolete. The notion of giving perennity to especially radio content, where generally, you tune in to the radio, you listen to an interview, you listen to a show, and then it's gone forever. That whole notion of being able, and that this predates podcasting, so the whole notion of being able to watch and listen to whatever you want, when you want, we were, working on that at that time. So that was huge. Obviously the notion of revenue, seeing, revenue streams, which were basically, generating millions for the media industry, seeing the internet as having the potential to destroy those revenue streams, those sources of revenue, that was also a constant area of concern and of work for us. And moving to cinema and to press, it was pretty much the same challenges. Distribution and revenue. What do you do? What do you do to stay relevant? What do you do in this day and age to ensure that your content gets the proper exposure or gets the exposure period, in a world where all the rules have changed.
Yeah. So when I want to talk about National Bank, and I'm going to fast forward a bit, but
yeah,
I do have one question. I'm going to geek out a little bit on media just because of your long tenure in that space. Who's figured it out? I feel like it's the whole industry is almost in like structural decline for the most part. If you look at traditional media, so everyone's talking about the new players, but I feel that none of the old players, except for maybe, let's say in the States, let's say a Disney that's going to give it a go with their streaming service. But in the Canadian landscape, I feel that particularly Canadian media companies are still very much behind. And maybe it's a very biased point of view. I'd love to hear you think, like, what does the future of the Canadian media landscape look like in 5-10 years?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because, the whole framework that guides media production and distribution dates back to it all started back in the 1930s, and it's been a while. So the exact date, unfortunately, it's getting a bit foggy. But way back then, the whole idea of creating a CRTC and a framework to help Canadian media develop and thrive was due to the fact that we had a very powerful and influential neighbor south of our border. And so to give Canadian media a fighting chance, we needed to sort of, put rules in place that allowed a bit of fairness on the Canadian field. That's as relevant today as it was back then, even more so because, digital is changing all the rules. That one's a huge no-brainer. And so looking at who in Canada has figured it out, I've seen some interesting plays over the course of the past few years. Obviously, and having been there and having also been one of the numerous actors who had given birth to that platform, I think Radio-Canada were and still are onto something with their 2-point TV platform. Although I do think that it is still a bit constrained in the sense that it still has very much a by Radio-Canada for Radio-Canada content. And I think if they opened up the walls of the garden a bit and created a space where more Canadian content could be distributed, I think that would benefit them a lot. So in the other broadcasters, it's in the little things. And I haven't been on their platform for a bit, but at one point, V really opened up the floodgates, and they had a value proposition where basically pretty much all of their programming with archives going way back was available online. So they had a really good digital value proposition. And right now, looking at the current landscape, I think that those who will survive and thrive are those who focus not on building distribution channels. They need to focus on producing quality content and ensuring that their content is available on the de facto platforms of today. And those ones, it's the no-brainers. It's Netflix, it's iTunes, it's Amazon, it's all those major players.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head where I talked about audience, and there's this great quote I heard last week where it says, just like how sound is in music, traffic is in audience, right? So focusing on the right metric that equates to long-term audience versus just traffic numbers and visits, and people still say hits. Okay, so I want to fast forward maybe now to talk about your move into the world of finance. So like, what motivated you to change sector from media into the finance world?
Yes. So when my mandate ended at Le Journal de Montréal, I basically, conducted an environment scan. And the question I was asking myself was, okay, which sectors first of all, I wanted to get out of my comfort zone. That was the first thing. I had been in media for a number of years, and I was ripe for new opportunities for learning. And so I did a very, very large environment scan. And the question I asked myself was, are there any sectors, and back then it was in 2014, what industries right now are going through the same profound transformation that media was going through in 1999 and up during that decade? Because I was really looking for that type of mandate, I was looking for that type of environment, that type of thrill. And it didn't take very long to me to see that the industries that were being hit with digital transformation the hardest were all industries that were related to let's call this services sector with a capital S. I was looking at insurance companies and law firms and financial institutions. All of them were in the throes of, mastering and harnessing the power of digital and going digital. And so that's where I turned my attention. And, at that point, National Bank of Canada, they had already kicked off their digital transformation about a year or two ago. And they were at a point where they were scaling their efforts, and they were building a new team, a new digital channels team. And I was seeing a couple of, ex-employees and ex-colleagues from the media industry, and, one by one, they were, jumping to National Bank. And so that really sparked my interest. So I figured, you know what, I got to go meet these guys. I have to figure out what's going on. And, thankfully, I loved what I was hearing, through interviews and everything. Loved what I was hearing. And thankfully, I think they liked what they were seeing in me. And so now 4 years later, here I am still part of the digital team in National Bank. So, but once again, what guided me to the bank, being, a graduate in communications in digital media, what drew me to the bank was that notion of digital transformation.
Yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme.
Yeah, it is.
So how would you describe your current role?
So my role today, I am senior manager in charge of digital channels for business, capital markets, and insurance. So as such, I am the sponsor and owner of a portfolio of initiatives at the bank that are directed towards all things client interaction. So, be it the development of, we're celebrating its 1 year anniversary, National Bank's mobile app for business. That's an example of the deliverables that came from my team. We've recently launched in collaboration with MobiWave, a Montreal fintech, a product called EasyPay, which transforms a consumer-grade smartphone into a point-of-sale device. So those are but a few examples of the products that are in my portfolio.
And how do you decide which project to take on? Like, what is the lens that you guys say, hey, we should go out and partner with like a MobiWave, and what is the strategy behind those choices? So
partnering with third party fintechs, startups. First of all, we do have a guiding principle. in regards that we will partner if it allows us to deliver quicker and better and cheaper than through traditional means of digital production and delivery. So that is the key guiding principle. But there's also a fair amount of intuition. I mean, when we run into and meet entrepreneurs who have a good idea and they present it to us, a lot of the times you just know, when they're onto something and when there's a natural fit. Easy Pay with MobiWave is the perfect example. When they demoed their technology to us, we just knew. We just knew that National Bank had to be in on this. This is a game changer. This is something that'll help the bank reach its long-term objectives. And we just jumped in with them. Said, let's do something. So it's a mix of the two. It's a part strategy, but it's also part of being able to seize those opportunities.
Yeah. Some of it is a good call. Sometimes it is part of the corporate initiative to say, hey, if we need to be more aggressive in, let's say, in the POS space, well, let's get there.
Yeah, exactly.
What obstacles do you face in being one of the people that wear the, let's say, the transformation hat internally? It's still a big boat that needs to change direction.
Yes.
What are the challenges that you face internally to make it happen?
Yes. I won't go about the traditional talking points in regards to digital transformation, the whole resistance to change and all that stuff, because I'm super, super happy to see that at National Bank today in late 2018, the organization is now at a point where there is an appetite for change. There's an appetite for transformation. And so everyone is, eager to contribute to innovation of any kind. From any aspect. When you look at today, I look at when I arrived at the bank in 2014 and the bank I work for today, and the amount of change is just staggering. The amount of positive change is staggering. We now work in, an open space environment, which was, one of the best integrated open spaces that I have seen. We've gone full agile in terms of development. We have a digital studio right now that's, well in place and that's poised to grow, to take on even more and more initiatives. We have a very, very clear focus in regards to where we want to go and what needs to be done to reach those goals. So a lot of very, very positive developments have occurred over the past 4 years. The challenges that we see today in regards to our digital transformation, from a business standpoint, it's very different than in the retail space, because a retail banking customer like you and me, we have our deposit account, we have our mortgage, we have our credit card, and so on and so forth. Innovation in that space is, there's a lot of it, and consumers have comparison points that aren't the same as in the business banking space. For example, in terms of consumer experience, the experience or the convenience of an Amazon or Google services or, Apple, so on and so forth, they sort of set the bar for what is expected of a digital consumer bank or digital consumer banking services. And I think that we've met the challenge, and I think we're there in terms of quality of experience today. In the business space, it's very different, because entrepreneurs have requirements that are other than, convenience. We're looking at notions such as efficiency and proximity, and the notion of providing trusted, proactive advice. So it's a very, very different, you have to look at digital transformation through a very different lens. And businesses they operate, they have their momentum, they have their operational model, and bringing on change, being a business's bank and proposing change, even if it, or a transformation, even if it is for the better, it does disrupt. And disrupting the way a business operates is a very, very delicate endeavor. And also there's the notion of, and what I'm seeing in our space, in the business banking space, is that there's a number of innovations. And I don't want to go all Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs here saying, clients don't know what their future needs are, and so on and so forth. But there is a little bit of that as well. So to summarize, the biggest challenge that we have in the business banking space is not necessarily internally, but more with our clients.
Yeah. How do you determine the needs of your customers? Do you do like customer journey mapping? Like, what do you use an exercise to like figure out what your customers are saying? And then corollary to that, then how do you then determine, to your Steve Jobs point,
yes,
well, what do we keep? What do we, let go of? And then what do we focus on that's new and, let's say, uncharted territory?
Yes. So it's a mix of three things. So the first one, obviously, just like, anyone who's serious about his work, we do our research, we do our homework. We're looking out for who's best of class, best of breed across the world for various market segments, be it small, medium business or, to large enterprise and corporates. So we have a good idea of who's, innovating around the world for those various segments. What we're also very much engaged towards is the voice of customer. We are a bank that is extremely customer driven. Customer experience for us is one of the supreme goals. Deliver an outstanding customer experience on all points. So to that effect, hearing from our customers, hearing from our clients, what are the needs? What are the pain points? What are we doing well? What are we doing not so well? What are we not doing at all? That is something that we are constantly polling from our customers. That one's super important. And the third one is, once again, it goes to proper intuition. Proper intuition, having a keen eye for, what the future holds.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you mentioned about this appetite for change, right?
Yes.
And what do you credit that to? Is it just leadership? Is it just a cultural norm that the bank has always been like this, that permitted, let's say, wholesale changes to occur without too much pain? So just curious as to your thoughts on as to what do you think is the underlying layer that permitted it?
So it starts definitely with our leadership team. So a few years before I started at the bank, our CEO, Louis Vachon, made a very, very strong statement to the bank, to its employees, that we are officially, transforming. We are officially transforming. We are going to become the bank of tomorrow. So it starts there. Today in 2018, when I look at our leadership team, I see a team that they are all strongly committed to that change. They all have that point in common. They are all committed 200% to transforming the bank and turning our organization into the biggest digital bank in Canada. And that is actually the aspiration of my boss, Lionel Pimpin, who's the head of digital at National Bank. And he says it time and time again. Our aspiration is to no longer be recognized as the 6th biggest bank in Canada. We want to be recognized as the biggest digital bank in Canada.
That's a great ambitious goal.
Yeah, no less.
So looking at the financial industry as a whole, or is there anything that you're keeping your eye on, even maybe outside of finance? What are you excited about that's around the corner?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge I see, and what excites me the most, is the notion of interoperability. We're at a point right now where technology offers the possibility for us to branch out of our walled garden. When I look at the digital industry and those businesses that are committed to developing all sorts of financial software, enterprise software, be it ERPs, treasury management systems, accounting platforms. There are some really, really strong, very, very strong products out there, tailoring to the smallest of the small businesses to large corporates. And these platforms are evolving in a way that they now have the ability to consume directly various data streams. What I would like to see in the future, my vision is that as a bank, we are the ones who play the nicest with all those systems. So that touches, the whole notion of, some call it open banking, everything pertaining to data portability, interoperability. That is, to me, the biggest area of opportunity.
What do you think is important but is not getting enough attention in your regard, or is underestimated? For instance, like everyone's talking about blockchain, but it's like, okay, well, it's kind of overdone right now. But what would be something, the antithesis to that?
Right now, you know what? I'll go back to interoperability. Go back to interoperability, because in the same way that back when I was working in media in the early 2000s, the big general knee-jerk reaction was, we need to protect our assets. We need to protect our assets. We need to build this site where this will be the only area, the only place online where our content will be accessible, and we'll slap DRM on it to ensure that there's no piracy, and we need to protect our legacy at all costs. This is what I'm seeing now to a certain extent in the industry I'm working in right now. The general reflex is to say, what do we do to ensure that we don't become commoditized, that we don't just become a dumb pipe? How do we ensure that, clients still flock to our address, flock to our domain to do business with us? And I think that is a flawed way of thinking. I think that that's a way of shutting out opportunities. And I think that ultimately that is the way of ensuring that one day you will become irrelevant. So right now, for all those reasons, the notion of interoperability, and I wouldn't say a lack of interest put towards it, because we are seeing some interesting things happening, and especially in Europe, where it's that notion has sort of been forced upon the banking industry through a regulation called PSD2, which is basically forcing banks to open up and expose services via APIs. But on this side of the Atlantic, I still get a sense that there's a lot of that, reflex to sort of protect our legacy.
Yeah. So yeah, it still feels like we're early innings in the space. It feels like there's so much still left to do.
Oh yeah,
to be truly a digital bank. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'd love to hear one or two last questions on as to like the big projects that you see coming down the pipeline. Maybe specific to National Bank or not, that you feel can benefit from being digitized, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, for those listeners who are clients of National Bank, you may have noticed that we're currently in the process of rolling out our new digital banking platform for retail customers, for consumers. So that is but the first of a number of major builds that we're currently working on. So essentially, National Bank of Canada has three major lines of business. They are consumer banking, business banking, and wealth management. So changes have been brought on the consumer side it can be expected that over the course of the next months and years, similar radical changes will be seen on our business banking platform and on the wealth management side as well.
Super cool. Super cool,
yes.
Stéphane. Maybe one last question, Stéphane. I've learned a lot today specific to your career, but also National Bank. Where can people learn more about yourself and what you're doing?
Oh, sure. I'm always available through LinkedIn. So look me up, Stéphane Bousquet. I think there are only like 2 or 3 of us out there. So by all means, reach out. I always answer my messages. And if not, it's Stéphane.Bousquet@nbc.ca. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Great. Thank you so much, Stéphane.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.